I think the best change of patch 1.14 is going to be the heavy attack changes. This like literally changes so much to do with combat, and it just adds like a higher skill ceiling. Roughly about 16 weapon categories has actually got an improved to their uncharged heavy attack. Now it is just going to be the first heavy attack that it does get, and no, it does not include the charged version, it is just uncharged. But for some of these weapon classes, they've been buffed to the point where the uncharged heavy attacks are like just as fast as a light attack. And for some of these weapons, you can actually make for some insane heavy attack into light attack combos. This weapon right here, the Knight Rider's Glaive, does get a slightly unique heavy attack compared to the other types of halberds, as it does result in a quick downward slam. Now this downward slam is basically identical to the light attack, but as of the recent patch, it's basically just as fast. This is the light attack right here, and this is the heavy attack. Now doing the follow-up heavy attack is going to be very slow, so I don't recommend chaining the heavy attacks. Being that this attack is similar to the light attack, when you actually click the light attack after the heavy, it does like the quick combo, and you can just keep going back and forth. Heavy attack, light attack, heavy attack, light attack. And it's just going to be much higher DPS than you would if you were just spamming light attack. And the most underrated part about all of this is that the combo never ends. When you're doing regular light attack spamming, the combo eventually ends and you get interrupted. So even though there might be some weapon categories out there that are not going to really benefit off this heavy attack, light attack combo, this change makes it to where you actually can have higher sustained DPS with all different types of weapons. Something like straight swords, you're not going to benefit much of going heavy attack into light attack even after the patch, because the light attacks are that fast, they're just going to benefit of way higher DPS. But when you actually continuously light attack spam later into the combo, it's going to be a bit slower. But if you actually interrupt this combo about halfway after a couple of light attacks by doing a heavy attack, and you can just keep chaining back and forth. It's such a small little change that might not make much of a difference, but it just adds like another skill element to your playstyle, that just clicking another extra button and doing certain types of combos, you're just going to benefit more and just notice that you're going to be melting enemies quicker. Now I'm not going to cover every single weapon that has been changed, but I am going to cover my favorite ones that actually have benefited the most of this heavy attack change. I think the best one being the Dryleaf Arts. As of the recent patch, this one has actually received an increase in terms of damage, and also the first heavy attack uncharged is going to be faster. Now, as I've always said about these Dryleaf Arts, or just the hand-to-hand weapons in general, is that I just always recommend just going uncharged heavy attacks over light attacks all the time, because they're basically just as fast, but just do way more damage. Now, this actually works a bit better with the Dryleaf Arts, because the follow-up heavy attack is actually really quick, and it just does more damage than the Dane's Footwork, so just going uncharged heavy attacks the entire time, or like mixing up charged heavy attacks in between when you have longer openings, is just going to be the optimal path. You're going to do roughly like 50% more damage with each attack, and also just do twice as much stance damage. The light attacks of the Dryleaf Arts do about 5 to 7 stance damage. The 2 heavy attacks in that combo does 22 stance damage, and it's extremely quick, and you can just keep using it back and forth. So if you're noticing that you're actually getting some pretty poor damage with the hand-to-hand arts, just don't use the light attacks. Use the heavy attacks all the time. Another weapon that has benefited off this change is the throwing daggers, and alongside this patch they actually get a bit more range now as well, but going into the heavy attack and light attack combo just is much better DPS than is going with just spamming light attacks. Now the damage difference isn't really as much as it is for the other weapon classes. You only really get about 30% more damage with the uncharged heavy attack than like a regular light attack. It does do like twice the amount of stance damage, but it goes from 2 stance damage to 4, which is still not noticeable at all. But this way, just going heavy attack into light attack, it is going to get you more damage, and it is going to be a never-ending combo. You can just keep going over and over again. The heavy thrusting swords are another weapon type that have benefited greatly off the heavy attack change. Now, almost every single heavy thrusting sword does actually get a different type of heavy attack, and I think like the regular poking attacks are going to be the fastest ones. It still might end up being higher DPS and there's a bit more stance damage than just going this R1 spamming, but I think the major benefits of the uncharged heavy attacks that the heavy thrusting swords get is that they actually stagger enemies like omens and knights. Typically, if you're just using regular light attacks, they're just not going to be able to stagger these enemies. But if you're going heavy attack into light attack, you could just potentially stun lock them a lot better. This is probably part of the reason why I probably preferred great spears like a little bit more than the heavy thrusting swords. But now since this change, it kind of brings them a bit more in line. Now I think the sword lance probably benefits the least out of all the heavy thrusting swords because it does get the great spear moveset, which has actually also been buffed to its charged heavy attack, but it is still the slowest one. But the same thing still applies. If you're fighting enemies like omens and knights that otherwise cannot be staggered by light attacks, you could just use the heavy. And speaking of which, I might as well just go into the great spears too. I think the lance has actually benefited the most of this. The initial heavy attack is basically just as fast as the light attack. Now the heavy attack doesn't really seamlessly follow into like the next light attack as well as like the Knight Rider's Glaive does do, but it still is like roughly the same speeds, and it does just do roughly 50% more damage too. So I think going into the heavy light attack combo is still best. Unfortunately, this change did not include the Serpent Hunter, so unfortunately those like horizontal swipe uncharged attacks are not going to be that quick, but the speed difference between the uncharged and the fully charged is not that big of a difference anyway. But other weapons that do have this horizontal swipe will be things like the Silurius Tree and the Barbed Staff Spear. It's not going to be the best in terms of DPS, but just having a quick horizontal swiping option with a Great Spear is obviously going to be really good if you wanted to hit multiple enemies at once, or if you're struggling to hit skinnier enemies. It just makes these weapons just even better. The greatswords are another weapon type that I like a lot with these heavy attack changes too. Now, I don't recommend really chaining the heavy attack into light attack continuously like I would with the other different types of weapon classes. And that's mainly because that the heavy attack only does roughly about 20% more damage than the light attack anyway, and it still is a little bit slower in terms of like chaining back and forth. But as I did mention with like the straight swords, is that it's a good way to like interrupt your light attack combos and just continuously do it over and over again, because when you get later into the light attack combo, it gets slower and slower. So after getting like 2 light attacks off, you could just interrupt it with a heavy attack and just continuously go that way. And also, I just like the one-handed heavy attacks a lot of the greatswords because they lunge really far. And these attacks just offer good variety because when you have it one-handed, you get horizontal swipes, and the heavy attack just offers a vertical swipe. Now, you might be thinking, does this change the Darkmoon greatsword? Because obviously it relies on its heavy attacks to just do a lot of its damage. And it does boost the speed of the heavy attack by a lot, but unfortunately, once you buff the weapon, it's still basically the exact same speed as it once was. And the difference is not that much compared to a charged heavy attack, so you're still just better off just spamming charged heavy attacks instead with the Darkmoon greatsword. The Nagakiba, to what I consider the best katana in the entire game, has now just gotten better as well because of these heavy attack changes. Now, all the katanas have gotten changed to its uncharged heavy attack to where it is faster, but the Nagakiba gets the best heavy attack because both one-handed and two-handed, it is a poke, and with this heavy attack chain, it's just really quick now. Now, you still might end up proccing bleed quicker and probably getting higher DPS just by just R1 spamming or light attack spamming, and I don't think going heavy attack into light attack is really as good. But if you're fighting in tight corridors or if you're fighting enemies weaker to piercing damage, then spamming the heavy attacks might just be better DPS. And it is just going to do more stance damage too. The heavy attacks do roughly around 30 to 40% more damage than like the regular light attacks, but they also do 11 stance damage compared to the light attacks only doing 6 stance damage. So you're basically getting a katana and a spear in just one weapon. It just makes it have such great versatility, and I think the most underrated part about this is that the heavy attacks actually stagger larger enemies like knights and omens. The light attacks don't necessarily do that, but with these heavies, it does give you that option. So all the weapons that I have talked about, I probably the ones that have benefited the most. I do have like some honorable mentions. With the daggers, it's still better to just R1 spam, but things like the Erdsteel dagger, to where it's better just spamming the uncharged heavy attacks, this one has just benefited greatly, and I think this is probably like the best like primary option that the daggers actually do have if you're just talking about hitting with the weapon directly. The Reapers or the Scythes have also been changed to be pretty decent. I don't think it's as good as things like the Knight Rider's Glaive in terms of its heavy attack into light attack chain. I think the regular Scythe does it the best because it does have a slightly unique heavy attack. But in terms of all the other Scythes, I probably don't really like it as much, but it still is a little bit faster too. As for things like the Axes or the Flails, I think it still needs a bit more in terms of just having these weapon classes be really good outside of just like uncharged heavy attacks. I think like the best axe is like the Warped Axe, and then spamming light attacks is still the best option. And as for the best flail, probably going to be the Serpent's Flail. And this one actually does benefits because using the uncharged heavy attack does actually explode the weapon skill. And also things like all the poking attack Colossal Swords have just gotten a bit faster. They're not really that much faster to where it's that noticeable. But being that the optimal method with these weapons is just spamming the heavy attacks anyway, whether they be uncharged or fully charged, they're just a little bit better now. But as for all the rest of the weapon classes and the weapons that I didn't really talk about, the changes aren't really that noticeable, and it doesn't really change up the way that I'd like to use the weapons either. The patch obviously did just make them better overall, but just not that much more in my opinion. Anyway, that's now done and completed. As always, let me know what your opinions are down in the comments below. If you did have like your own findings and your own different types of combos that you really enjoyed, just discuss them down in the comments. Now, as for the next video, I kind of wanted to do like a quick little review of the entire patch, because there are some things that I still want to talk about that I really like and some things that I dislike about the recent patch. So definitely do subscribe for that one. And also do follow me on Twitch because I am live there every single day doing a bunch of challenge runs, and I probably end up starting doing some challenge runs that are specific to this patch as well. But yeah, thanks for watching. Catch you guys around. Bye.